So good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us today for a little Israel update. I'm John Haller from Fellowship Bible Chapel in Sunbury, Ohio, and I have with me today Stan Goodenough from originally from South Africa, but has lived in Israel for 30 or more than 30 years, probably. Stan, welcome.
Thank you, John. Good to be here.
And so Stan and I met in Israel, in Jerusalem, about 7 years ago. I was over there during the 50th anniversary of the Six-Day War during the Trump visit, and we went over and met at had sort of a little makeshift panel and discussion for a few hours at a hotel in Jerusalem. So Stan's got a website, Jerusalem Watchman. Stan, just tell us a little bit about yourself and your relationship to Israel.
Thanks, John. All right. So, South African, born to a missionary couple, with my bloodline going back via Florida, missionary to South Africa, from the United States, and grew up in South Africa. Lived in every corner of the country. My parents were Bible-believing evangelicals, if you want to put a label on them, I guess. And I was raised with the Bible, raised in church, attended numerous Bible studies and so on through my childhood and early teen years. Then went prodigal for many years and was returned by the grace of God back to my faith walk around about the age of 28. At that point, I was a journalist working on a newspaper in South Africa, covering the final years of the apartheid era. And in 1991, I moved to Jerusalem, where I had spent 3 years in Israel prior to that, just working on kibbutzim as a volunteer. But in 91, I joined the staff of the International Christian Embassy Jerusalem, ICEJ, as a reporter. To write about the geopolitical events shaping history, really, but tied to the Middle East and specifically, of course, to Israel, from a biblical point of view. And worked with the Christian Embassy for about 8 years or so doing that. And since then, have had my own news site briefly. Became a tour guide in 2010. And currently, that's my profession. When there is no COVID and when there is no war and when there are tourists. At the moment, of course, there are no tourists to speak of, really. So kind of in a holding pattern, waiting for what's going to transpire with the current conflict and how that will affect visitors to the land and so on and so forth. So that's I guide the land of Israel with the Bible in my hand. It's my primary guiding source. And I do believe that events in Israel are central to all of human history. They always have been, in my understanding, and there always will be. Whatever's happening anywhere else in the world, there is a tie-in to what is happening in Israel. I'll just say this, John, just to update you. Right now, the land of my birth has hauled Israel before the kangaroo court in The Hague, and beginning today, Israel is being investigated by the International Court of Justice for alleged genocidal war crimes. I am in the process of, in fact, relinquishing my South African citizenship. And am in full flow of applying for Israeli citizenship. I have turned my back on South Africa and I want nothing more to do with that country. So that's kind of where I am at the moment.
Well, I do want to talk to you about that because it's interesting. I was watching a little bit of that today, and it's a complete travesty of justice. So I don't know if you remember, I'm a semi-retired trial lawyer and also help pastor a church here in Ohio, and I could just tell you that you became a journalist really for the International Christian Embassy in Jerusalem about the time of the Oslo Accords. Is that right?
Yes, 1991, we had the right after Operation Desert Storm, George Herbert Walker Bush summoned Israel to Madrid, and there was a big international peace conference, as it was called, in Madrid. That was my first assignment for the ICEJ. A year and a half later, Israel signed the Oslo Accords on the White House lawn. So, yeah, right back then.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I'm sure you probably know this. When the Madrid conference was taking place with Bush, we call him Bush 41 here, just to kind of keep things straight.
Mm-hmm.
While they were in Madrid talking about dividing up the land of Israel, he had a big storm and almost destroyed it. Well, it ended up as a movie called The Perfect Storm, and a very unusual storm. It actually was a cold water hurricane, highest waves in northern Atlantic history, and it just about destroyed the Bush family compound at Kennebunkport, Maine. And in '93, I had a deposition in D.C. The day before. No, it was the morning of the signing of the Oslo Accords. I'd come in the day before, and so I did my deposition, got done sooner, and went down to see one of my best friends from high school who was a newly elected congressman from Arizona, a Democratic congressman, very liberal, but still a good friend. And he was talking about, I've got it backwards. The next morning I went down to D.C. They had signed the accords the day I got in, when I arrived, just after I arrived in D.C. And he was talking to me about it. He was Jewish, and he was very excited about what happened. But we can see that what we've seen from the Oslo Accords is just an absolute disaster. And now it's 30 years later, we're seeing I think, the ultimate fruition or outcome of what those Oslo Accords wrote. So you mentioned a little bit about what's going on at the ICLJ. So let's just start with that at the International Court of Justice. And I was watching a little bit of it this morning. It's a complete joke, but tell me what you think's going on and why is South Africa involved in this?
South Africa's involvement is it's intriguing, I guess, to be honest. In South Africa, as a reporter, a news reporter at the time of the release of Nelson Mandela, more or less, and the transition from apartheid South Africa to the so-called Rainbow Nation, my focus was on the end of apartheid. I grew up believing that apartheid was very wicked system. There was a great deal of suffering that it caused. We white South Africans lived luxuriously while the majority of our countrymen lived pretty close to some kind of slavery, really. It was a really awful system. And on the South African political spectrum, if you like, I would have been seen as a left winger because I was so against that setup. Fascinating, because then when the system crumbled and Mandela was let out of jail and he went to the into the presidency, up until that point, South Africa, in its pariah status, had been very close allied with Israel. The two countries, both of them pretty much globally hated, had collaborated together in many fields, not least of all military and even nuclear military fields. What Nelson Mandela, who went to prison because he really believed in human rights and was opposed to any kind of oppression of the majority of his people. He wanted democracy, he believed in that kind of South Africa. The greatest irony was that at his inauguration as president, he embraced Yasser Arafat, who had until that point perhaps more Jewish blood on his hands than anyone since World War II. And he aligned South Africa, the new South Africa, the Rainbow Nation South Africa, he aligned it behind Libya, Gaddafi's Libya, and Khomeini's Iran. And he made close collaboration and friendships with countries whose majority of his people were being abused by their leadership. So whereas he had, in a sense, he had been like, one of my champions as a young man. From the moment he became president, he lost me completely in terms of any kind of support. And I saw where South Africa was going back then, and what I saw very clearly, I believe, also what God showed me, what I saw South Africa was going to go downhill into a black hole of violence and um, with no glorious future, despite the world's applauding of the new South Africa and all the optimism that was in the air. So South Africa, right at the beginning of the post-apartheid era, became anti-Israel in its positioning. And here's the irony, that this country that knows what apartheid is, real apartheid is, has become is pretty much standing at the front of the international chorus of condemnation, accusing Israel of being an apartheid state, which Israel is nothing of the kind. It has aligned in the new alliance that now exists between Russia, India, China, and a couple other nations called BRICS. South Africa is very much in that corner of the world stage right now. And yeah, it's decided, for reasons that are actually quite beyond me, I find it quite bewildering, it's decided that it will be the nation that actually accuses Israel openly of genocide. Now, an accusation which we could expect to come from, from Iran, we could expect it to come from North Korea, we could expect it to come from China or Russia or whatever, perhaps. But here's South Africa, not a major player on the world stage, really, not at all. A country of incredible corruption and criminality, but it's leading and I think that speaks to maybe at a deeper level to the forces that are behind the motivation that has South Africa now sitting opposite Israel in The Hague and laying this charge of genocide against the Jewish state.
It's and you grew up in the real apartheid system where the definition developed. And what's the difference between South African apartheid and what actually exists in Israel today?
Okay, well, I'm going to keep it brief because it could get right. It's also interesting, I guess, from an observation point of view, that South Africa's apartheid system was adopted by the Prime Minister at the time, Hendrik Verwoerd, in 1948, the same year that Israel became a state. South Africa became an apartheid country. That's an interesting coming together of historical lines, if you like. And it was your president, Jimmy Carter, who wrote a book accusing Israel of being an apartheid state. I'll answer your question, John, with a few examples. If Israel was an apartheid state, then Israel's Arabs, that comprise about 1.4, 1.5 million of the nearly 10 million Israeli citizens, Israel's Arabs would be living pretty much in ghettos, in segregated areas. They would not be allowed to call themselves Israeli citizens, just as black South Africans were not allowed to call themselves South African citizens any longer. Under the apartheid system, they had to live in Bantustans, in homelands, called Ciskei and Transkei and Zululand and so on. And they lost their South African citizenship. If Israel was an apartheid state, Israel's Arabs would have to have a special permit to enter Israel from their townships. They would not be able to travel on public transport in Israel alongside Jews. They wouldn't be able to swim on the same beaches as Jews. They wouldn't be able to get a higher education beyond probably grades 10 at school. Certainly no university or college education would be allowed them. They would have no vote. They would have no representation whatsoever in the Knesset. They would sweep Jewish streets and clean Jewish garbage and basically do menial labor. And yeah, as I said, they wouldn't be able to have freedom of movement. They'd have to be in their townships at night or have a special permit from the Israeli government to travel around. They certainly would not be represented as they are, both in the Knesset, on the bench of Israel's highest court, the Supreme Court. Israeli Arabs have exactly the same rights, exactly the same privileges, exactly the same protections under law as Israeli Jews and all the other minorities. And to in any way, shape, or form call Israel, the state of Israel, with its Jewish and Arab populations, all free, all equal under law, to call that an apartheid country is to pervert and twist what apartheid was. It's to demean the memories of the real victims of real apartheid. And here's this incredible irony that the leaders of South Africa, the black leadership in South Africa that knows what apartheid is, has hooked itself onto this lie and is now trumpeting the lie. And of course, they should know, right? That's they were the victims of apartheid. So if they say that Israel is an apartheid state, everybody's going to believe them. But it's not an apartheid state. It's a lie to call it such. And yeah, there you go.
It's ironic that the South Africans who actually engaged in, I have a lot of friends in South Africa that write to me all the time. For example, one sent me this morning a chart that showed that since about 50 years, the Palestinian Arab population within the confines of Israel, that would also include Judea Samaria area, has grown from about 1.3 million to about 5.5 million in population, which seems to go against the claim of genocide in and of itself. If Israel's doing genocide, it's not very effective at it. And also, the South African government has been engaged in, I don't know what else to call it, genocide of farmers that aren't the right race over the past number of years. And now they have the audacity to go to the International Court of Justice and claim genocide. It's one of the biggest travesties I think I've ever seen in my life, and it's so we'll see how it goes. What's the Netanyahu appointed Barak, the judge who had kind of put in the reasonableness standard that led to all the uproar over the judicial reform. He appointed that judge as the person who could sit on the International Court of Justice as the Israeli judge. What's the feeling about in Israel about that you've been able to ascertain?
So just over a year ago, the current coalition government, the Netanyahu government, was elected, as you know,
Right.
and prior to it even being installed as a government, and the different parties that would help form the coalition positioned themselves to take on the judicial system because they believed that Aharon Barak, when he was the head of the Supreme Court in Israel, that he had single-handedly and undemocratically altered the empowered above and beyond their previous powers that judiciary in South Africa to in fact override and overrule decisions taken by the democratically elected government based on, as you mentioned, among other things, the so-called standard of reasonableness. So the champion of that judicial coup, which is what right-wingers in Israel would call it, although he himself has been pretty much outside the picture of all the protests that were happening all the way up to October the 7th and the beginning of this current war, he himself was not involved, but he was the main architect behind the judicial system that had led to, first of all, the current government being voted in because it was one of the platform planks that they had that they would alter this and redress this error by Barak. But it also led to this fomented and in many ways funded from outside of Israel by anti-Israel progressive forces. Protests that took place, I think, more than 43 weeks or something. Every single weekend we had protests in Israel. He wasn't involved in those protests directly, but as I said, he was the kind of the figurehead behind the judicial coup. So when Netanyahu kind of surprised everyone by appointing Barak to represent Israel at the International Court of Justice against the genocide charges, it did cause a pause. It was a bit of a kind of a step back. Well, hang on, what is this all about? But I think we must remember that Israel is, up to its neck in war right now. And even though the progressive forces that were trying to unseat the Netanyahu government with all these protests, they've kind of had to take a back seat for a little while. They're still working from outside, as it were, from beyond the front lines of this war. They're still working to unseat Netanyahu, and they still want him out. But I think the focus of the country is so much on the hostages and so much on the daily toll of soldiers that are dying and the testimonies that are coming out from the hostages that were released about how they were abused, and of course the ongoing. I mean, I can't find words, and that's my job is to wordsmith. I cannot find words to describe adequately the enormity of October the 7th. What happened? It's the country is traumatized. From Dan to Beersheba, the country is traumatized, and still trying to actually accept the reality of what happened. It was just so big, so huge. So I think now Barak, we've got to be careful because there are a bunch of Baraks in Israel, and of course there was Ehud Barak, and a friend of mine made the mistake thinking that it was Ehud Barak that was appointed to represent Israel. No, he's not. He's not a lawyer.
Right.
But Barak
thinks he is, but he acts like he might be. They're
Yeah.
smarter than the lawyers.
Yeah.
But Ehud Barak, a former defense minister and short-time prime minister, who's really been leading the protest against the current government.
Yes, so not him, but so Aaron Barak, he's highly regarded in many areas internationally for his judicial abilities and skills. I'm going to deliberately use the pun and say the jury is out and will stay out on just what kind of a job he's going to do. We don't know. But the thing about Netanyahu, John, well, one of the things about Netanyahu is that he disappoints a lot, but he also surprises a lot, and sometimes he seems to be able to think ahead beyond the news cycle, and so we'll have to see. I don't really have it. Yeah.
Well, it might actually turn out to be kind of a deft political move in that he gets a leftist progressive judge to go and rule in Israel's favor at the International Court of Justice, which would sort of take a lot of, I think, the wind out of the progressives that they just overturned the reasonableness law on an 8-7, depending on how you count the votes, 8-7 vote, including his Ehud Barak's, not Aaron Barak's progeny, Esther Hayut, who had been retired by age as a Supreme Court justice, but was allowed to participate in the most recent decision. That's kind of an interesting thing. So, look, let's talk about October 7th and what you've seen and observed. You mentioned from north to south in Israel, everybody has been traumatized by it. I've talked to people, and I still think everybody's having trouble wrapping their heads around what actually happened. But just what have you observed, what you've been doing, and that sort of thing?
All right. So I'll just introduce it with the kind of run-up to October the 7th. I guess I have no idea who all our viewers or listeners are, but my position, as I mentioned earlier, I'm a Bible-based Christian. I see the world through scriptural eyes, if you like, through biblical eyes. I do believe that the Jewish people restored to their homeland since 1882 have come back in direct fulfillment of the ancient Hebrew prophecies.
Absolutely.
The most remarkable proof, if one wants to have proof of something that you need no proof for faith, of the authenticity of God's word and the reliability of it. So the Jewish people are back in their land because that is their destiny, to be restored from around the world, ultimately to be restored as a nation to their God. And every year, even in a country that is officially a secular democracy, Israel is not a religious country, it's a secular democracy, multi-party, unicameral. In that country, whether you're secular, way left, or ultra-Orthodox, or national religious, so-called settler, right-wing, you are steeped in the Bible. Your annual calendar, school year, you study Torah. Even in the secular schools, you study the Torah. You keep the school vacations, the school holidays are tied to Passover, Pentecost, and Tabernacles. You cannot get away from God. You cannot get away from the Bible, no matter how secular you are in Israel. God is central to life there. It just is, the whole history. Even Ben Gurion, David Ben Gurion, who called himself a Jewish atheist, held up the Bible and said, "This is our title deed to the land." Because it's an incomparable document of a record, historical record, describes the land in detail, the topography, everything. So over the years that I've lived in Israel, I have seen the kind of the Kulturkampf, the inner struggle between the secular, liberal, progressive Jewish community and the Orthodox, observant to ultra-Orthodox. But increasingly, I have seen coming to the fore a manifestation of faith, whether even among so-called secular Jews, a manifestation of faith. They will not stand. They will not say we don't believe in God. They will not want to, grow side locks and wear prayer shawls and black and white, but they will not say we don't believe in God. They just don't want to go down the road of orthodoxy. But God runs through the country. They virtually all fast on Yom Kippur, and this year was no exception. Now, we've been through 2 years leading up to October this year. We've been through 2 years of incessant terrorism, but kind of around the fringes of the country. A ramming here, a shooting there, a stabbing in the other place. Terrorism happening all the time, but kind of peripheral compared to the Second Intifada, when Jerusalem was a ghost town. In September, October of last year, Jerusalem thrived and was alive with people. There was tourism was way up, almost up to pre-COVID levels again, and the flood of Jews that was coming into the country to celebrate, to keep the whole of the days of awe, from the Feast of Trumpets, Rosh Hashanah, through Yom Kippur into Tabernacles, walking around Jerusalem in those days, especially through the Feast of Tabernacles, just seeing, first of all, the outpouring of repentance before God, through the 10 days leading up to Yom Kippur, and then the national fasting and repenting that was so widespread. And then every day and night through Feast of Tabernacles, a wave of Jews flowing back and forwards from the mountain of the Lord, from the Temple Mount, in and out of the walls of the old city, just celebrating their faith in so many ways. And I remember going to, at the end of Tabernacles, of Sukkot, was the Friday, and the next day was going to be Simchat Torah, the rejoicing, celebrating, one of the happiest days on the Jewish calendar. And I went to bed that night thinking, wow, this has been a phenomenal Feast of Tabernacles, and biblically, I think this is a period that speaks to the coming of Messiah, when he will come and tabernacle amongst his people. That's a theme that runs very strongly. Woke up very early, as I always do, on Saturday morning. Watched my neighbors heading off to the synagogue. About 6:15 that morning, heard the red alert go off on my phone. And I can't even recount that day, John, emotionally steady. It really gets me very deep. The alerts went off and they didn't stop. They just went on and on and on. Every second there was another alert. I thought it must be a technical problem. It must be some kind of malfunction in the system. Looked out the window. The Jews were still walking to synagogue. I could hear them singing in the synagogue next door. I thought, no, something is going on here. I've got a couple of sons living up on the western fringe of Jerusalem. I called them. They were asleep. It's the Sabbath. They often sleep in. No public transport. I didn't have a vehicle, so I decided to walk up to them to see what was going on. By then, I began to hear reports on the radio that these were real rockets. They hadn't yet come as far as Jerusalem, but they were falling on the coastal plain. And as I walked up, it's about a 40-minute walk up to my son's place, the sirens went off. I lay down on the road 2 or 3 times on my way up there, and I saw the Iron Dome intercepting the rockets literally right above my head, way up in the sky. And by the time I got to my son's place, they were up and they were in the bomb shelter, the security room. And then we stood on the balcony. We looked down because from his porch, you can see down all the way to Tel Aviv. You can see all the way to Ashkelon. Look down on the coastal plain. It was so quiet. There were the alarms going off, but it was so quiet. There were no aircraft in the sky. There were no jets, no fighter planes. And almost always in Israel, you can hear a fighter plane at some point. And for hours and hours, there was no sign of any real military response. And then the reports began coming out of southern Israel that were, I remember initially some figures, something like there were 80 people murdered, which after the second Intifada back in 2000 through 2004, 80 was a big number. Well, it's history now, a recent history, but we all know that between 1,200 and 1,400 people were butchered in the most inconceivable ways, just the most horrific things that you could imagine. And some 240, 250 people taken hostage, including babies and old women and everything else. And a lot of vicious sexual abuse. I mean, all things that just are so difficult. Even I've seen all the pictures, heard so many testimonies, so hard to take in. And Israel went to war, And that was the announcement by Netanyahu when he finally came on air. I think it was quite late that day. He said, "We're not launching an operation. We're going to war." Um, and then of course everything got on. Preparations began for the ground incursion. And this is also important. I don't want to necessarily dominate the microphone, and you can interrupt me at any point you want to, but this is
No,
really important.
you're very important to listen to. Please
Okay,
continue.
thanks, John. So once the news came out of what had actually happened, I flipped on my television and I saw the world's response. It was like this recoil globally, this shock wave went around the planet. And the Star of David, the Israeli flag, was projected onto 10 Downing Street and the White House and the Eiffel Tower and the Sydney Opera House and the Brandenburg Gate, or whatever it's called in Germany. And the whole world was reacting in an official way with shock and empathy or compassion or whatever for Israel. And I thought, wow, that's unusual that you'll actually have international response, but it must be because of the size of this thing. It's just such a big and horrific massacre that had taken place. I don't think it lasted 24 hours, but I'll be gracious and say maybe 36. Within 36 hours after that massacre took place, however, the world leaders, beginning with the President of the United States, world leaders began to express their horror and their disgust and their condemnation of the massacre, but in literally the same breath tried to apply brakes on Israel's response from the get-go. And before the soldiers, even the first tanks and the first soldiers entered Gaza, because it took days to prepare for that. I remember, I'll just quickly say this, that when on the Sunday morning, that's the 8th of October, I was heading down south to Eilat by bus to meet a group of Australians who were coming on tour. And as it would turn out, they came in and then they left 2 days later, and that tour didn't happen. But all the way down, those of your listeners who've been to Israel will know there's a long drive from Jerusalem all the way down to Eilat in the south. Pretty much the entire road, the entire highway from Eilat to Jerusalem was bumper to bumper cars, as the reservists were just pouring north, just streaming north in response to it. This was less than 24 hours after this event had happened. And then we had images of Israelis around the world jumping on planes and flying to Israel to fight. But it took a long time to prepare for the invasion of Gaza. And before the first soldiers were going in, the international community, again led by Western leaders, were beginning to try and slow down or somehow tamp down on the Israeli response to what had happened, as if it was just another act of terror, the latest round in repetitive cycles of violence, and began to express very, very quickly their concerns, not for the hostages, but for the Gazans. And international sympathy very, very quickly swung away from Israel and came full force behind the Arabs in Gaza. And that, of course, has played out. And I guess we'll talk about that some more. But that has brought us to the point right now we're at, where Israel is in fact pulling its forces out of part of Gaza, and there's incredible pressure from primarily the United States for Israel to allow Hamas back in, and that's what's happening.
So I remember that day well too. I woke up about 12:30 a.m. here in America, which would have been 7:30 in Israel, and my phone was blowing up. I have one of the red alert apps on my phone, and then the news started pouring in. It was people kidnapped, people attacked, 100 dead, 200 dead, 300 dead, 400. The number just kept. It was hard to keep up, and I hardly slept for about 48 hours as I watched this, because I do care about Israel. I do think it's incredibly important prophetically to the world. As you said, this is the God of Israel. It's his land. It's where he chose. But so this is the sort of the question. We've had a lot of discussions here in America and with my friends in Israel. What happened why was there a delayed response? Is there any thinking there about how that happened?
Okay, John, I think that's a really important question. And in a sense, what I'm going to do is put forward a very short answer. Um, this comes out of my own observations over years of an inclination that there seems to be among conservative thinkers, Christian thinkers, looking for kind of conspiracy ideas behind what happened. There was there was a quick flurry of that kind of thing that came out.
Sure.
I mean, some of it was so outrageous. It was ridiculous that Israel had known this was going to happen, had wanted it to happen, that some people in Israel had actually allowed this to happen. I mean, all kinds of stuff came out. For me, it belonged in the bath bag. I had no space for it, no time for it. I don't believe any of it at all. Israel was caught napping. Israel was put into place. Let's take one step back and have a quick spiritual viewpoint of this, if you like. The biblical premise for Israel's restoration is a restoration in their relationship to God as a nation. Ultimately, that's where they're headed. And they need to know, and they will know, and already many of them do know, that their safety, their security does not lie in the incredible IDF. It certainly does not lie in the United States of America. It doesn't lie with anyone but the God of heaven. And it is in the God of heaven that they have to put their trust. Now, after the 6-day war, when they went into that war expecting to be annihilated, and within just 6 days did what they did, there are some suggestions that that kind of went to their head. And that's one of the reasons why the Yom Kippur War, less than a decade later, was almost the end of Israel, because they were too full of themselves. They got too proud of what they had achieved. I won't dig down too deep into that, but I do know that Israel is highly regarded, and they regard themselves highly, although I think in a realistic way, with the intelligence gathering services, the Mossad, the Shin Bet, the military intelligence. Virtually every nation in the world looks to Israel for airport security, military proven battlefield successes of the IDF. They're quite incredible in so many ways. And everything collapsed on October the 7th. They were asleep, literally. The evidence that this was going to happen was seen, noted, and then just discarded. There's going to be obviously some serious, investigations into all of that down the road, depending on what happens with this war, of course, and maybe we'll get to some of that today. But my sense is that there was overconfidence. They misread things. They proved to be not flawless. They made mistakes, terrible mistakes, and people are going to pay for that. Heads are going to roll for that. I don't personally believe it was anything more than that in a physical sense. The spiritual aspect, of course, we can think about it. Why would God allow such a thing to happen? But that's always a question we have, isn't it? I mean, why would God allow 6 million Jews to perish before the creation of the state of Israel? Why did that have to happen? Why did this have to happen? One of the outcomes of October the 7th was, of course, instantaneous unity in the country. And what's unfolding now is a sense that the Israel after October the 7th is going to be a very, very different Israel from before October the 7th. Many ways. Also politically, what direction it's going to go. Also in terms of faith, because there's there are many reports of very secular Jews turning back to the faith of their fathers in the aftermath of October the 7th. So I think it's the earthquake effects on Israel at every level are going to. I don't think we can really see exactly what's going to happen, but I think it's going to change things dramatically.
So we may go over a little bit if you have time. I don't want to take too much of your time, but I was going to try to keep
another half hour.
Okay. So we'll keep when you got to leave, just give me a few minute warning, and because I think what you have to say is very important. So what I've noticed here since then, you're right. For 36 hours, everything seemed to be, let's support Israel. Then when Israel started responding, now we have it shifted, and it shifted in a big way. I'm on Twitter, and I can tell you that it is like a sewer of Jew hatred flowing through my phone 24/7. It's unbelievable, and people within the sort of Christian community, what people would say Christian right, that were allies on certain issues and everything, have really turned on Israel, and I mean in a big way. And sometimes they'll be more subtle in their anti-Semitism. So I've said this is that, as Christians who believe in the God of Israel and the restoration of Israel and all of this prophetic plan that's playing out, we can make Israel an idol, which is bad. But on the other side, we shouldn't use clever theological arguments to hide our rank Jew hatred and anti-Semitism. And I see a lot of that. And I'll see conservative commentators, and they will say, well, I never say anything anti-Semitic, but they'll interview rank anti-Semites and never challenge them on anything. And it's a way for them to get out there what they really want to get out. So so what have you observed on that issue?
Okay, so again, the soldiers were still mustering. They hadn't gone into Gaza. There had been no bombing. Nothing had happened in Gaza when I don't know how many hundreds of Australians marched down in Sydney, calling out, "Gas the Jews, gas the Jews." And it was like there were fumes. There were fumes, anti-Semitic fumes lying on all over the planet that just ignited. And from Israel, looking out at the world, we just saw this eruption of Jew hatred from side to side. I wasn't looking over to the east very much. I wasn't focusing too much on what was happening, China, Russia, etc. But the Judeo-Christian world, as we used to call it, aflame, huge masses on the streets of London, Paris, Berlin, I mean, just everywhere. And my Jewish interlocutors in Israel, they went white. They just paled with horror, with fear, with unbelief, disbelief. I mean, the Holocaust can happen again. They suddenly realized it. The world is ready for another Holocaust. The world would let it happen. There's too much hatred out there. Israel is too much a thorn in the side of humanity. Israel's self-defensive efforts are going to push up the price of gas at the pump in the United States, affect everybody's economies. From every point of the compass, accusations and charges were being leveled at Israel. And after 85 years or 80 years of saying never again concerning the Holocaust, the Jews woke up to the fact in October 2023 that yes, it can happen again. The world's ready for it to happen again. And that's one of the reasons why Israel is traumatized. It's layer upon layer of pain and disbelief and fear that has just washed over the nation since the morning of October the 7th. You mentioned earlier, I think, John, we were talking about the origins of the so-called peace process, the Oslo Agreement, which brought us to where we are today. I had a tour of Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial Museum, quite a few years ago, and one of the staff there told my group, said something along these lines. She said, when Hitler became Chancellor of Germany, he didn't start gassing the Jews right away. The first thing he did was he appointed an information minister, a propaganda minister, to go out and poison the minds of good German Christian people against the Jews, to demonize the Jews, to portray the Jews as subhuman, as lecherous, as bank money grabbing, responsible for economic woes in the world, etc., etc. And when by the time the death factories were in place to begin obliterating the Jews of Germany and Europe, everyone was ready. Everyone was ready for the Holocaust to happen. The Germans all actively and enthusiastically supported the Holocaust, or at least sat quiet on the sidelines and didn't do anything. Well, I was at Madrid in 1991 when the International Press Corps, I don't know, 5,000-6,000 journalists in the press center next to the palace, began to. That was when I began covering events in the Middle East. And for 30 plus years now, I have seen the media used by Western governments poison the minds of humanity against the Jewish people, against Israel, against the Jewish state. Portrayed as apartheid, portrayed as war crimes, war criminals, portray them as human rights abusers, etc., land robbers, poison the minds of humanity against the Jewish people, so that when the world is ready to wipe out the Jews, there'll be no one to stand with them. And how tragic, how beyond tragic that our Christian fellow believers have actually joined sides with Satan against this nation, or are joining sides, or staying quiet and allowing this to happen. Again, I'm sure you probably in your generation, I in my generation, we grew up wondering what would we have done if we'd been in Germany in the 1930s. You know, what would we have done if we'd heard of what was going to happen, what Hitler had written in Mein Kampf. And now we're living in a time when, well, what are we doing? What are we going to do? Israel is alone. Israel is alone. Tourism has dropped off. I have no work. There are a few solidarity tours coming. Most Christians are staying away. Christians who come to Israel regularly are staying away. Oh, it costs too much. Oh, it's dangerous. This is the time. This is a verse from the Bible that we like to use a lot. Such a time as this. Well, for such a time as this, we Christians need to be rallying around Israel. We need to be coming to Israel. We need to be encouraging the Jewish people with our words of support, of faith in their God, reminding them of His promises. We've never had an opportunity like this to bring healing to the people of Israel. And most of us are missing it because we don't want to get involved in the war, or we don't want to stay away. And many of us are also being seduced with the lies and the anti-Semitism. And it's terrible. It's so tragic.
From my own observation, what happened in the 1930s, which was before I was born, obviously, but it was my parents' generation, seemed to be centered in Europe and Russia and some other places. Now it seems to be worldwide. It's a much different feeling this time. I mean, it is everywhere that you look. It's in our universities, it's in our churches. And as you said, it's either people are coming out, being very vocal in their opposition to anything that has to do with Israel, or they're just being quiet, and it's very troubling. And I think you're right that people have to decide what they're going to do. And I can tell you when I do interviews like this, or I talk about this at church, the hateful comments that I get are just unlike anything else that I ever talk about. And it's very troubling to me. So let's talk in the little bit of time we have left, talk a little bit about where you see this going. I know that there's a couple things, like, is there going to be war in the north? What about the areas of Judea and Samaria and the problems there and the different fronts that Israel is facing in this war? Is there going to be war in the north? And then, maybe if you saw what our Secretary of State had to say when he was in Israel yesterday, which, well, I'll leave my editorial comment out about it. I don't trust this administration. I've referred to it for years as the Biden administration because I think it's not just Joe Biden who's running the show. There's a person whose name begins with O that's, sort of helping out behind the scenes. But so where do you think this is going, war in the north and that sort of thing?
All right. So first of all, I'm very careful to not give air to too much conjecture.
Mm-hmm, sure.
I've seen. There's quite a lot of people in what I call the pop prophecy world who are out there milking the Christian cow for support with classic end time prophecy stuff, trying to fit everything into end time prophecy from a kind of an evangelical perspective, and that's a subject for another day. But really, the idea of trying to predict what's going to happen, I long ago stopped doing that. I just think it's foolish. So what I'm looking at is, first of all, I see what God has said that He's going to do with the ingathering of the Jewish people, and it all culminates in His revelation of Himself as their Savior, as the one who comes to their aid, who comes to their defense, who comes to their deliverance when they are surrounded by the world, by all the nations, Gog and Magog, whatever format you want to do that in. It's ultimately when He steps in and intervenes in a way that is unmistakably divine, that Israel recognizes who He is, and that Israel's destiny is again in its right place with God. Now, the realities that the Oslo Accords have brought us to are that, and primarily, I mean, the United States was front and center at Madrid, and all the way through, they are the U.S. is the chief sponsor of the so-called Land for Peace process. It's had a number of different names, but it's now known as the two-state solution. And this was the term on Antony Blinken's lips yesterday. This is the Republican or Democrat. This has been the unbroken course of the United States, except during the Trump administration, and it has resulted in Israel's enemies proliferating, their ability to strike Israel being massively boosted, as Israel's hands have been repeatedly tied by American administrations, mostly, who have tried to force this two-state solution upon Israel, even when all evidence accrued over 3 decades, all evidence has left no doubt that there is no way to a two-state solution. There is no way that this is going to be achieved. The two-state solution is only the 21st century version of the final solution from Israel's perspective. Its purpose ultimately would ultimately lead to Israel's destruction. And on the road to as the world has tried to birth or spawn this two-state solution, Israel has had to sit more or less on its hands, trying to police the conflict in Gaza, not crush the enemy in Gaza, but police the conflict with here and there various operations when things have got out of hand. But Hamas has grown. Back in 1991, when I was first in Israel, Hamas was a tiny little organization, a handful of people, which Israel actually had expelled. They were sitting freezing in the mountains of Lebanon, and the international community insisted that Israel allow the leadership back in. The current head of the Hamas, he was one of the prisoners released in exchange for Gilad Shalit, this Israeli soldier who was held by Gaza for 5 years. So you've had the mushrooming of Hamas. In the year 2000, Ehud Barak in 24 hours, pulled out of the security zone in southern Lebanon, and Hezbollah, which was still a relatively small organization at that point, came running right up to the fence and began to install its rocket systems, which now numbers something in the region of 180,000 missiles that are now facing Israel. Only Israel. They're not pointing at Turkey. They're not pointing at Syria. They're pointing at Israel. And Hezbollah has grown and grown and grown. And Iran, which of course is birthing and growing these organizations itself, is able to proliferate in its quest for nuclear weapons, even as it stomps on the Israeli and American flags in the streets of Tehran and swears death to Israel and death to the United States. And suddenly Israel is in a situation, and this was the shock awareness that suddenly hit all of us in the face on October the 7th, that Israel is facing an existential threat that isn't even tied up to a nuclear warhead. There's an existential threat from Hamas and the Hezbollah and the Houthis in the south, and the Iranian-backed Iraqis, and the Iranian-implanted presence in Syria, surrounding. Israel is surrounded, and now Jordan and Egypt have both threatened war if Israel dares to try to get Gazans to go into either of those countries. Israel is now surrounded. As a direct, this is the rotten fruit of the Land for Peace process. So it's brought us to a point now where, okay, so according to reports, and they are conflicting, but according to some reports, there was a plan directed from Tehran, which would have seen Hamas and the Hezbollah and the Houthis and the others launch simultaneous attacks against Israel. And Hamas apparently preempted for one or other reason. And there may be, and there probably is, a divine reason, because when I read in the Bible that God calls himself the Lord God of the armies of Israel, well, there's no way around it for me. He's the Lord God of the IDF. That's one of the armies of Israel, and he's the commander in chief of that military. And they are fighting his war. They are fighting representing the kingdom of God, actually, on the battlefields now of Gaza. And because of the size of what happened on October the 7th, and because of what it revealed, how it unmasked this world, the Jew hatred of the world, and how it revealed that Israel doesn't have any friends. Doesn't have any friends. I'm talking about governments, nationally. And how there's a term, there's a phrase in the Bible where God says, you tended the wounds of my people too lightly, something like that. Where there was what happened on that day did not bring Israel support. It actually deprived Israel of support and has brought Israel to a point where now she's in the International Court of Justice, in the dock, facing the whole world, and blind leaders, represented by people like Anthony Blinken, are trying to bully, pressure, force, threaten, blackmail Israel into continuing down this road to its self-destruction. And because Israel is looking to Washington more than it's looking to heaven, even with all the political ability that the Prime Minister Netanyahu has, we've come a long way away from Israel being a secure Jewish state, where Israel is now really facing existential threat. Now, when I say I don't want to use conjecture, I don't. So, but what I do see, what's actually happened, is that Hamas apparently preempted. We did not have a full-scale multi-front war, even though Israel has been fighting on a number of different fronts. There hasn't been a full-scale war on many fronts. But as it intensified in Gaza, it has kind of been followed by an intensification in the north. And now, as Gaza is moving into what they're calling the third stage of less full-scale war, except for Khan Yunis in the south of the strips, still quite intense at the moment. But the scales are tipping now more in the direction of a massive conflict snowballing in the north. And I think there's quite a lot of there's quite a big chance, if I can use that word, that we could see the north explode. I'm kind of watching it literally every single day now. It's escalating all the time. Massive efforts are being made to stop it, to stop the war from leaking into. That's the term that the Americans are using. From the war spilling over onto other fronts. But I think there are enough factors at play here, and war being as unpredictable as it is, for this eruption to happen in the north.
Well, I mean, Stian,
yeah.
how does Israel deal with the fact that, I don't know what the exact number is. I hear different numbers, 60, 80, 100,000 people have evacuated from their homes in the north, living in hotels all over Israel, not working. Their businesses are shut down. You have 350,000 or so reservists, maybe 500,000 people in the IDF now and the Israeli Air Force. And I mean, I'm sure it's having, as you know, personally, it's having a huge economic impact. But how does Israel? Who was it I saw the interview with? Sarat Zahavi, who is with Alma Research in the north, and she said we can't live like this because we can't live with the threat. So whatever we think happened in Gaza with the terror base there, it's as bad or worse on the Lebanon border, where every third home has a direct connection to Hezbollah in some way. And how do they deal with it? It seems to be almost an impossible choice. And then our government is saying, oh, well, you want weapons, you have to shut everything down.
So to use an illustration, shaking Israel's hand with one hand, the United States, Israel's great friend in the world, shaking Israel's hand with the right hand, the other hand against Israel's shoulder, pushing Israel back and back and back over 30 years now, insisting that Israel allow the creation or the rehabilitation of the Palestine Liberation Organization to the Palestinian Authority, that Israel pull its forces out of all the Palestinian Arab areas in Gaza, Judea, and Samaria, that Israel finally pull all the Jews out of Gaza altogether with the big disengagement that happened in 2005. Israel has, because Israel sees that. I mean, what they say in Israel is, when it comes to foreign policy, when it comes to Israel's international global interests, the first consideration is the United States, the second consideration is the United States, and the third consideration is the United States. Israel believes, until now, that without America, it cannot survive. And because America takes full advantage of that, and its leadership has, as it pursues American views, visions, and interests in the Middle East that are much more tied to economics and oil and everything else, Israel has taken steps back and taken steps back and taken steps back. But now Israel's back is against the wall. And the minister Smotrich, Bezalel Smotrich, he said to Anthony Blinken yesterday, he said, the days of us preferring America's interests above Israel's interests are over. It's now Israel's interests that are of paramount importance. It's our interests. We will do what's best for us. And what's best for Israel is to destroy Hezbollah completely, push them way back out of rocket range, uproot their entire system. And you're talking about a massive underground tunnel system. You're talking about, I mean, Gaza, child's play by comparison to what's waiting to happen from Lebanon. But the entire northern Galilee, the entire upper Galilee is vacant of people. It's just got soldiers now. They're all out of their homes. Many of the homes have been destroyed. Businesses have collapsed. Produce is rotting in the field. The whole of the north is uninhabitable by civilians. Excuse me. And as I say, up to 100,000 Israelis are living in hotels and are displaced. They're refugees in their own country. They cannot be pushed back much further. Some would say they can't be pushed back at all. And it doesn't matter, when Blinken went one-on-one with Netanyahu, they closed the doors and the two of them were just together. What came out of that room, and that would have come from Netanyahu himself, is that it was a very unpleasant meeting. Netanyahu, who loves America in many, many ways and for all kinds of different reasons, he understands, I believe, that the United States has become an enemy of Israel. And it's hard to say that. It's the most bitter pill for the Israelis to swallow. But they basically have no choice anymore. America is expecting that Israel will risk its existence, potentially allow itself to be destroyed for American interests, for global interests. And that's why I think, and this is me, the believer, now looking at the Bible and seeing what's happening on the ground, this is why I think that the commander-in-chief of the IDF, that's to say the God of Israel, will allow this thing to unfold more and bigger and enable Israel to be this threshing sledge that God refers to her in, I think it's in Isaiah chapter 41. He said, I will make of you an iron threshing sledge, and I will use you, Israel, to thresh all the nations round about. I think that's where this is probably going. Now, the can may be kicked down the road just a little bit, because pressure and blackmail, and if you want us to provide you with weaponry, you better stop what you're doing. And it was as direct as an order that was given. Blinken gave an order to Netanyahu: no more civilian deaths. The audacity of it is it's off the charts. But Israel really has no choice. If they want to stay existing, they're going to have to crush Hezbollah. They're going to have to deal with this threat from the north. And if this does go into a quiet slump because of this unbelievable pressure from the United States, if Israel somehow pulls its forces out of Gaza, and this is why it's so infuriating. One of the reasons it's so infuriating. Every single day, there's 1, 2, 5, 7, 9 soldiers that are dying in Gaza. They were dying to liberate or to drive out or to excise Hamas from the northern part of the strip. Now they're pulling out of the northern part of the strip, and Hamas is pulling back in. Hamas came out of one of the tunnels yesterday with 2 bodyguards and he spoke to the cameras. He said, we're moving back into the north, moving back into the north of the Gaza Strip. So what about all the soldiers who've given their lives, who've fallen in northern Gaza? I mean, I've been to funeral after funeral. There are so many, it's unbelievable. What the sacrifice was in vain to please America?
Mm-hmm.
They must split on the corpses of their own soldiers and allow Hamas to come back in and create another October the 7th, which from the mouth of Hamas themselves, they said we will keep doing October the 7th for 1,000,000 years. I mean, that's the genocidal force here. And the United States is aligned with the genocidal force. And Israel is the victim. And God will not sit quiet. And if you want to know, if we want to understand why God hardly holds back in expressing his fury towards our nations, when he talks about how he's going to deal with our nations, and he says, I'm going to take the cup that I have forced Israel to drink for years, I'm going to take it out of their hands, and I'm going to make you, the nations, drink the cup of my fury. John, I don't think we are anywhere near to being ready for what's coming on America and South Africa and Australia and England and France and Germany. I think we're heading for apocalypse, and it's going to be a consequence of what we have done with and to Israel. That's my conviction.
So
it's
yeah, we're
I've got
sort
about,
of
I've got about
at the
5
end
minutes.
of your time, and listen. So what can we as evangelical Christians in America and elsewhere? There's people listening from all over the world, South Africa and other places right now. What can we? What are some action steps that we can take?
Well, it's always said, prayer is our most powerful weapon. We are not fighting flesh and blood and so on, which is actually true, completely true. If you're a believer, prayer is the most important. And prayer and fasting is when we fast and pray, and we humble ourselves before God, we afflict our souls, to use the biblical term. We show God how serious we are in our prayers. We don't just say a few prayers for the peace of Jerusalem and then go to down to the next restaurant for lunch. We actually take God's throne, we take a hold of it, and we cry out to God for him to fulfill his word, reminding him of his promises. Because he says over and over again, he will not bring the Jewish people back to their land to face destruction. He's restoring them to their land to take care of them as a shepherd takes care of his flock. That's his promise. So I have to tell him, and I do tell him, God, you didn't say this. You said you would bring them back and plant them in the land with all of your heart and with all of your soul, and you would not cease from doing them good, and you would rejoice over them with singing. You promised that you would keep them as a shepherd. You promised these things. So you have to keep this. Your name is at stake, God. Which is, by the way Moses interceded for Israel when God wanted to wipe them out because of what happened at the golden calf. Moses got into God's face and he said to God, you dare not, you cannot wipe them out. You made promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and what's more, your name is at stake. Why should they say back in Egypt, what kind of God do the Hebrews have? He brought them out of Egypt so they would die in the wilderness? For the sake of your name, God, you've got to do something. Now we read in the Psalms, we have the same question of God. What will they say? Will they say among the Gentiles, where is their God? He's brought them back to let them be wiped out, which of course is what Muslims say. They say that Allah has brought the Jews back from the four corners of the earth to their great graveyard. That's what Islam teaches. So God, you've said that you, the God of Israel, would bring your people back and you would preserve them in their land. So you have to act and remind him of his word. We have that incredible right and privilege. It's very humbling, but it's true. We can remind God, who never forgets anything, we can remind him of his word. And I think we should pray with a great deal more intensity. I'm speaking in general terms because I'm sure there are many people who are listening to this program who do pray very, very intensely. But I think we should really, really pray. But I don't think we should say, well, prayer is all we need to do. You said, what about us in the United States, Christians in the United States? Well, I don't remember when it was, but there was once upon a time a 1,000,000-man march on Washington, D.C. that had something to do with Christian values in the country. I remember the Promise Keepers, an organization that used to exist, and if they still exist, they used to have big rallies. Massive numbers of men would come together. There have been, the anti-Semites are out there in en masse. But there is what to do in the political. I have, as a non-American, I have visited with senators and congressmen on Capitol Hill from both sides of the aisle to talk to them about American relations with Israel and specifically this two-state solution. Now, what I learned from their aides is, it's easy to write an email. If you really want to impact your senator, your congressman, pick up the phone and call his office. And if you want to quadruple the impact, go there personally and see him. Get off your behinds and go and see your congressman. Go and take hold of the lapels, not physically, but shake you're a democracy, and those people up there are supposed to represent you. So shout. I don't know, but I mean, let me just quickly take a step back and say, we say that Jesus did nothing without being led by his Father. I don't think we should do anything without being led by God, but I think we should be willing to do everything, including lay down our lives, literally, our finances, literally, lay it down, to, in one way or the other, however we may be directed by heaven, come to Israel's defense, come to Israel's side. And there's nothing like speaking to the heart of the Jewish people. And if you've got a Jewish community where you are, and you've never been to a synagogue, go down to the synagogue on Friday evening. Just go down and introduce yourself. Say you're a Christian. You just want to come and spend some time with the Jewish people. You've got everything that's most dear and precious to you as a Christian. You got from them. The Bible, all the biblical heroes, the disciples, Jesus himself. Everything that you've got comes from the Jewish people. Let them know how much we owe them, how much we are in debt to them, how much we love them, and how much we believe in their future, and how much we're willing to stand with them against the hatred and the anti-Semitism. Come to Israel, empty your bank account and come. God will God has the cattle on 1,000 hills. He'll repay. He'll supply all your needs. And don't be afraid to come. When you come to Israel, you come right under the wings of God, as Boaz said to Ruth when Ruth took hold of an Israelite woman and said, "Where you go, I will go. Where you live, I will live. Where you dwell, where you die, I will die." Take hold of the Jew and go with him. Go to him. Encourage him. Remind him of, say to the cities of Judah, "Behold your God, how beautiful on the mountains are the feet of them who bring good news." Go and spread the good news. Behold your God. I mean, there's so many ways, John. There's so many ways.
Well, look, that's very challenging, very sobering all at the same time. And thank you for taking the time today. I know we stayed a little bit over, and I so appreciate it. Let's do this again soon. And is there a way for people to follow you on social media or web?
Telegram. If you go to Telegram, why don't you send me an email to my surname, goodenough.stan@gmail.com, goodenough.stan@gmail.com, and ask to go on my Jerusalem Watchman Telegram feed, and I'll put stuff up there.
Yeah, I've been following that. It's excellent. So Stan, God bless you, and thank you so much, and we'll do this again soon. Thank you.
Thank you, John.